This lesson is on the Sub-Saharan Empires of Africa, and this is part 3 of a 4-part series on Africa in the post-classical period. I want to start by looking at Pre-Islamic Ghana. So this is a civilization that existed before the introduction of Islam in the 7th century, right? And one thing I want you to keep in mind is that West Africa is very rich in gold, but it's cut off from the Mediterranean coast by the Sahara. So we kind of think about, pre-Islamic West Africa is kind of an island, right? I mean, you have the Atlantic to the west, you have the Sahara to the north and east. To the southeast is very dense jungles, a very difficult passage. And so West Africa had these smaller civilizations, really a kind of small kingdom. But as you know from lesson 1 in this series, the camel caravans of the Berber nomads began to connect Ghana to North Africa and the rest of the world network. And so, pre-Islamic Ghana was a successful but smaller kingdom, and it exchanged gold and salt and dates for Greco-Roman manufactured goods, cloth and furniture and sculpture and things like that. So more of a commercial trade than a trade of necessities, right? When we talk about commercial trade, we are talking about people making things just to sell, not making things to survive, and really making more like luxury goods and consumer goods and fun things as opposed to, like I said, necessities. Right? And so this was the approximate boundaries of pre-Islamic Ghana. It was founded sometime around the 3rd century CE, so towards the closing centuries of the Roman Empire, but after the fall of the Han Dynasty of China. Right, and really the state was successful because it taxed and controlled the trade routes between West Africa and the Sahara. And it was really based on these very powerful military kings, but very loosely organized. It was more like bringing clans or tribes together under a single political military leader, as opposed to a highly organized state like the Persian Empire or something like that. Right, and then we move forward really about 1,000 years to the first Muslim empire, and this is the empire of Mali, and they broke away from Ghana in the 13th century, and part of this was because the Malinke people were ethnically different from the Ghanans. If you recall back to the first lesson in this series, I showed you that map of all the ethnicities in Africa, and so sometimes you've got one ethnic group ruling 2 or 3 others, and that's very ripe for breakaway ethnic groups to then go off and form their own state. And really what brought Mali together was that they adopted Islam, and as I talked about before, that gives a kind of social unity, cultural unity, linguistic unity, and organization, as well as a set of common laws, right? So again, it's the big 3, right? Religion, language, and laws. Those bring people together into organized states, and it was the introduction of Islam that did that for Mali. In fact, when we look at the Epic of Sunjata, although in our text it's spelled Sunjara, that is a very important document from this time period, and that'll be our focus during this unit. Right? And so Mali took over those older Ghanan trade lines and positions. So almost like a revolution in that this ethnic group comes from inside and takes over. These were not foreign invaders, but they also controlled the gold supplies, which made them very economically powerful in the region. All right, so the capital was based at Timbuktu, which was a very important city in West Africa at the time period. Very, very sophisticated architecture and engineering and literature and medicine and science, right? These pictures here are of texts from the time period, and the Muslim and African, or Arab Muslim and Muslim African peoples of Timbuktu were way ahead of the Europeans at this time period. I mean, this is back still when Europeans are walking around on dirt streets. You know, they're curing every single disease by bleeding and leeches, and, you know, really just backwards. Oh, you know, you've got a sick stomach, it's because there's a demon in your stomach. I mean, that was the state of science and medicine in Europe at this time period, while the people of Timbuktu were doing eye surgeries and dissections and all sorts of advanced sciences. And so I think that's one of the interesting things for us to keep in mind, is that, you know, civilizations rise and fall, they grow up at different time periods, and so just because one civilization is more powerful at one period of time doesn't mean it's always been that way or it'll always be that way. You know, so Timbuktu, you know, would be an interesting topic for you to study for your independent project if you're curious about this. You know, the next state in the succession of the West African or Sub-Saharan empires was the kingdom of Songhai. And this broke away from Mali during its declining, you know, period, and they established the capital at Gao. And still, you know, they adopted Islam as the organizing force, and, you know, they had a little bit more internal tension in its history compared to Mali, because, you know, pagans and animists remained, and there was less conversion, and so this was a little bit more of a tense situation here. But, you know, it's just kind of the same model as Ghana and Mali: control the trade routes, control the gold mines, adopt Islam to give, you know, culture, language, and laws. And you know, you should be noticing the period or the pattern there, right? And Songhai was successful for quite a while, finally defeated by a Muslim army with early muskets, right? And a musket is a rifle. It's a specific kind of rifle. And that defeat was very important, and the clans that made up the kingdom of Songhai started to drift apart and break away. And then at that point, power shifted south to the Hausa people of modern-day Nigeria. And so that, you know, concludes our, you know, look at the sub-Saharan African states of the post-classical period, right? And so again, you want to kind of keep in mind the unifying influence of Islam, but also the importance of trade and how a single factor, really the camel, can significantly alter world history. I mean, there are these developments, these inventions. You know, in our spice factor, we put it under interactions with the environment. There are these scientific breakthroughs that suddenly change everything. And so while, you know, we're really focusing on Islam and Africa as a part of this unit, again, this might be a good topic for your independent project to really look at, you know, the biology and physiology of camels, and the breeding and domestication of camels that allowed them to, you know, really to be the yachts or the fleets or the caravans of the desert. And so that's it. Thanks for watching.